The text message arrived at 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday night, just as I was reviewing quarterly reports for my consulting firm. It was from my father, Dr. Harrison Remington, and it contained exactly 7 words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. Pack your things. You're no longer welcome here. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at my phone screen in my downtown Asheville penthouse, the city lights blinking through floor-to-ceiling windows, thinking this had to be some kind of mistake. No explanation, no phone call, just a cold, digital dismissal from the man who had raised me, who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding 3 years ago, who had called me his brilliant girl since I was 5 years old. But here's the thing about family betrayal. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who destroy you. And sometimes, when they realize what they've lost, karma doesn't just knock on their door, it moves in permanently. What my parents, Harrison and Vivienne Remington, didn't know as they sent that text was that their perfect daughter, my younger sister Celeste, had been feeding them a carefully crafted web of lies for months. What they didn't realize was that while they were busy believing every poisonous word that fell from her lips, I was the one keeping them from losing everything. I was the one who had been quietly, secretly, paying their $14,000 monthly mortgage on their sprawling estate in the prestigious Biltmore Forest neighborhood. For 18 months, I had been transferring money from my business account to theirs, covering their mortgage payments on a property worth $2.7 million. 18 months of watching my own savings dwindle, while they maintained their lifestyle, their reputation, their standing in Asheville's elite social circles. And they had no idea. You see, my parents had always been brilliant at maintaining appearances. Dr. Harrison Remington was a respected cardiologist at Mission Hospital, and my mother, Vivienne, was a former debutante who now chaired half the charity committees in Western North Carolina. But what the country club crowd didn't know was that their medical practice had been struggling since the pandemic, that their investments had taken massive hits, and that their pride was too enormous to admit they couldn't afford the mortgage on the house where they hosted their famous Christmas galas and summer garden parties. When they had confided in me about their financial troubles, quietly, shamefully, over dinner at their mahogany dining table 18 months ago, I didn't hesitate. I had built my consulting firm, Meridian Strategic Solutions, from nothing into a 7-figure business. I had more money than I knew what to do with, and these were my parents. Family takes care of family, right? So I made the transfers look like they were coming from a mysterious client who preferred to remain anonymous, someone who owed Dad a favor from years ago. It wasn't a loan in their minds. It was a gift from a grateful former patient who had struck it rich. They never questioned it, never asked for details. They just accepted the monthly reprieve and continued their lives as if nothing had changed. Meanwhile, Celeste, 28 years old, chronically unemployed, and perpetually dramatic, had been living in their guest house rent-free, spinning elaborate stories about why her latest business venture had failed, why her last relationship had imploded, why she couldn't quite get her life together. But she was the baby, the one with the sparkling laugh and the ability to make our parents forget every disappointment with a single hug and a well-timed tear. I should have seen it coming. The way she looked at me during family dinners, calculating and cold. The way she asked pointed questions about my business, my income, my success. The way she seemed to take mental notes every time our parents praised my achievements or asked for my advice. Celeste had always been jealous, but I had mistaken her resentment for sibling rivalry, not recognizing it for what it truly was. A powder keg waiting for the right spark. That spark, I would later learn, was my announcement 3 weeks earlier that I was considering moving to Charleston to expand my business. It was a casual mention over Sunday brunch, just thinking out loud about new opportunities. But to Celeste, it must have sounded like abandonment, like I was planning to leave her alone to deal with the parents she had always seen as my burden to bear. So she decided to make sure I would leave, but not on my terms. on hers. What happened next was a masterclass in manipulation that would have impressed a criminal psychologist. Celeste began planting seeds. Tiny, carefully placed lies that grew into a garden of deception. She told our parents I had been talking about cutting off contact with the family. She showed them fabricated text messages where I allegedly called them burdens and pathetic. She convinced them that my success had made me arrogant, that I looked down on their struggles, that I was planning to humiliate them by exposing their financial problems to their social circle. But the final blow, the lie that sealed my fate, was pure genius in its cruelty. Celeste told them that I had been secretly recording our family conversations, collecting ammunition to write a tell-all book about their failures as parents. She showed them a voice recorder app on her phone, claimed she had found it in my purse during our last family dinner, said I had been gathering material for months. It was completely fabricated, every single word. But it was believable enough, specific enough, cruel enough to shatter 18 months of trust and 32 years of love in a single conversation. And so, at 11:43 p.m. on that Thursday night, I became homeless. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I had done everything right for the wrong people. Because I had trusted that love was stronger than lies, that truth would eventually surface, that family meant something more than convenience and comfort. But here's what my parents didn't know as they sent that text message, what Celeste couldn't have predicted in her carefully orchestrated scheme. I kept records of everything, every bank transfer, every mortgage payment, every financial rescue I had quietly executed. I had documentation that could prove exactly who had been keeping them afloat and who had been dragging them down. And in exactly 4 weeks, when their next mortgage payment came due and my automatic transfer didn't go through, they were going to discover that their anonymous benefactor had been their daughter all along. The daughter they had just thrown away based on the lies of the daughter who had never given them anything but headaches and heartbreak. Sometimes justice doesn't require revenge. Sometimes it just requires patience. Sometimes the best thing you can do for people who don't appreciate you is to stop saving them from the consequences of their choices and let them save themselves. Or try to. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in my leather chair, overlooking the twinkling lights of downtown Asheville, trying to piece together how 18 months of secretly saving my parents from financial ruin had somehow made me the villain in their story. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. While they were crafting their angry text message, probably sitting in the very living room I had kept them from losing, my latest mortgage payment to Pinnacle Bank was already scheduled to process in 3 days. $14,000. Again. Just like every month since March of last year. But here's what made this betrayal cut so deep. It wasn't just about the money I'd been pouring into their lives. It was about the person orchestrating my downfall, Celeste. My baby sister. The same girl I had taught to ride a bike when she was 7. The same teenager I had helped through her panic attacks before every high school presentation. The same young woman I had co-signed an apartment lease for when she was 23 and couldn't find anyone else to trust her. This was the sister who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who called me crying at 2 a.m. when her college boyfriend broke her heart, who texted me photos of every outfit before job interviews because she valued my opinion more than anyone else's. Or so I thought. Now I understood that every shared secret, every vulnerable moment, every time I had opened my heart to her, she had been filing it away like ammunition, learning my weaknesses, studying my relationship with our parents, mapping out exactly how to destroy the foundation of trust I had spent 3 decades building. The most twisted part? Celeste had been watching me sacrifice my own financial security for our parents' comfort. And instead of feeling grateful that someone in the family was stepping up, she felt threatened. Threatened by my success. Threatened by my stability. threatened by the fact that I had become the daughter they turned to when things got difficult, while she remained the daughter they worried about. But rather than use this as motivation to build her own life, to finally take responsibility for her endless string of failures and false starts, she chose destruction. If she couldn't be the successful daughter, she would make sure I couldn't be either. If she couldn't earn our parents' pride, she would steal their trust in me instead. The calculation behind it was breathtaking. Celeste knew that our parents' greatest fear wasn't financial ruin, it was social humiliation. The idea that their private struggles might become public gossip at the country club, that their carefully maintained image might crumble in front of the Asheville elite they had spent decades trying to impress. She knew that suggesting I might expose them would hit them where they were most vulnerable. And she was right. Because instead of calling me to ask if her accusations were true, instead of giving me a chance to defend myself against claims that were so outrageous they should have been dismissed immediately, they chose to believe her. They chose to see me as a threat rather than as their salvation. What my parents didn't realize, as they sided with their manipulative younger daughter over their loyal older one, was that they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about loyalty, truth, and the difference between someone who loves you enough to sacrifice for you and someone who loves themselves enough to sacrifice you. In exactly 26 days, their anonymous benefactor would disappear. The mysterious payments that had kept their dream house from becoming a nightmare would simply stop. And when Pinnacle Bank came calling with past due notices and foreclosure warnings, they would have to face the reality that their golden child, their precious Celeste, couldn't save them. Only I could, only I had been, and they had just thrown me away. To understand how we got here, you need to know who the Remington family really was beneath the polished exterior. We weren't always wealthy. We weren't always living in Biltmore Forest with its manicured lawns and gates that required security codes. My parents built their empire from nothing, and I was there for every struggle, every late night, every sacrifice that created the foundation of everything they would eventually take for granted. When I was 8 years old, we lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on Merriman Avenue, above Mrs. Kowalski's Polish bakery. The smell of fresh bread would wake me up every morning, and I thought we were the luckiest family in the world, because sometimes Mrs. Kowalski would give me day-old cookies when I walked home from school. Dad was still in his cardiology residency at the time, working 18-hour days at the hospital, coming home exhausted and covered in the antiseptic smell that I learned to associate with dedication. Mom worked too back then. She taught 3rd grade at Claxton Elementary and graded papers every evening at our tiny kitchen table while I did my homework beside her. There was no hired help, no housekeeper, no gardener. There were just the 4 of us, because Celeste was only 2 then, still in diapers, and completely oblivious to the financial stress that kept our parents awake at night. I remember Dad's hands. They were always clean, surgeon clean, but they trembled slightly when he paid bills. I would watch him from the doorway of their bedroom as he sat on the edge of their bed with a calculator and a stack of envelopes, moving money around like pieces on a chessboard, trying to make everything fit. Mom would sit beside him, her teacher's salary budget spreadsheet in her lap, and they would whisper numbers to each other like prayers. "We can delay the car payment until next month," she would suggest. "But then we'll be behind on utilities," he would respond. "What about your student loans? Those can't wait. The interest is killing us." This was my education in sacrifice. Watching my parents choose between immediate needs and future dreams. Watching them pour every spare dollar into Dad's medical training because they believed, we all believed, that eventually it would pay off. And it did. By the time I was 12, Dad had completed his residency and started his private practice, Remington Cardiovascular Associates. We moved to a real house on Kimberly Avenue, with 3 bedrooms and a backyard where Celeste could play on a swing set. Dad assembled himself one Saturday morning. Mom quit teaching to help manage the practice, handling billing and patient scheduling with the same meticulous attention she had once given to lesson plans. I loved those early days of success. The way Dad would come home and actually smile, the way Mom started buying name-brand groceries instead of store brands, the way they would sit on the porch after dinner and talk about plans instead of problems. But what I loved most was being included in their dreams. They would ask my opinion about paint colors for the new office, let me help Mom organize patient files, trusted me to answer the phone when the after-hour service was overwhelmed. "You're going to be something special," Dad would tell me during our Sunday morning walks around the neighborhood. "You understand how things work, how to make them better. That's a gift." Mom agreed. She enrolled me in advanced classes, encouraged me to join debate team and student council, helped me apply for summer programs at UNC Asheville. They saw potential in me that I was only beginning to recognize in myself, and they invested in it the same way they had invested in Dad's medical career, with complete faith and every resource they could spare. Celeste, meanwhile, was just happy to be along for the ride. She was 7 when we moved to Kimberly Avenue, old enough to appreciate the bigger house and the swimming lessons and the family vacations to Myrtle Beach, but too young to understand what it had cost to get there. She didn't remember the apartment above the bakery or the nights our parents had worried about paying rent. To her, comfort was normal. Success was expected. Struggle was something that happened to other families. By high school, the practice was thriving. Dad had built a reputation as one of the most skilled cardiologists in Western North Carolina, and patients drove from Tennessee and South Carolina to see him. We moved again, this time to the house on Oakmont Ridge that would become their stepping stone to Biltmore Forest. It was a beautiful colonial with 4 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, and a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains that made Mom cry happy tears the day we moved in. "We made it," she whispered to Dad as we stood in the empty living room, our voices echoing off hardwood floors that gleamed like mirrors. But making it, I was learning, wasn't a destination, it was a moving target. Because once you reach one level of success, there's always another level calling to you, promising that this time, this achievement, this house, this status symbol will finally be enough. The Biltmore Forest House was their Everest. A $2.7 million estate in the most prestigious neighborhood in Asheville, where senators and CEOs and old tobacco money lived behind iron gates and manicured hedges. It was more than a home. It was a declaration. A statement that Dr. Harrison Remington and his family had not just succeeded, but had arrived at the pinnacle of Southern society. I was 28 when they bought it, already building my consulting firm and proud of their achievement. I understood the symbolism, the way it represented every sacrifice they had made, every risk they had taken, every night they had stayed awake worrying about money. This house was their proof that it had all been worth it. What I didn't understand then was that it was also their trap. Because once you've claimed a place at that level, you can't afford to fall. The mortgage payments weren't just financial obligations. They were the price of maintaining an identity, a social position, a lifetime's worth of careful image crafting. And when the pandemic hit, and Dad's practice struggled, when their investments tanked, and their income dropped by 60% almost overnight, they couldn't bear to let anyone know. They couldn't bear to be seen as anything less than the success story they had worked so hard to become. So when they came to me, quietly, desperately, sitting in that mahogany dining room with its crystal chandelier and oil paintings of people we weren't related to, I didn't see it as a burden. I saw it as my turn to invest in their dreams the way they had once invested in mine. I saw it as love. What I should have seen was the beginning of the end. Building Meridian Strategic Solutions from nothing while secretly funding my parents' lifestyle was like running 2 marathons simultaneously. Most people don't realize that when you're supporting a family's $14,000 monthly mortgage payment on top of your own business expenses, you're not just writing checks, you're restructuring your entire financial life around someone else's needs. My days started at 5:30 a.m. in my downtown office on Pack Square, a renovated space I had chosen specifically because it was walking distance from 3 of Asheville's major corporate headquarters. I had identified a gap in the market for specialized strategic consulting for mid-sized companies transitioning from regional to national operations, and I was determined to fill it before anyone else caught on. While other consultants focused on either small startups or Fortune 500 corporations, I positioned myself as the bridge. I worked with companies that had outgrown their regional infrastructure, but weren't large enough to attract the attention of major consulting firms like McKinsey or Bain. It was a sweet spot that required me to be part business strategist, part operational efficiency expert, and part crisis management specialist. My first major client was Appalachian Brewing Company, a craft brewery that wanted to expand from 3 locations in North Carolina to 15 locations across the Southeast. The owner, Jake Morrison, was brilliant at making beer, but had no idea how to scale operations without losing the personal touch that made his brand special. I spent 3 months embedded with his team, redesigning their supply chain, developing standardized training protocols, and creating systems that could maintain quality control across multiple states. The project was a masterclass in controlled growth. We launched 5 new locations in the first year, each one hitting profitability within 4 months, unheard of in the brewery industry. Jake was so impressed that he introduced me to his network of business owners, all facing similar scaling challenges. Within 6 months, I had a waiting list of clients and was turning down projects because I couldn't handle the volume. But success in consulting isn't just about landing clients. It's about delivering results that create case studies other companies want to replicate. My breakthrough came with Thornfield Manufacturing, a furniture company that had been family-owned for 3 generations, but was struggling to compete with overseas production. They were hemorrhaging money and considering closing their Hickory plant, which would have eliminated 200 jobs in a town that couldn't afford to lose them. I spent weeks in their factory, learning every aspect of their operation from raw material sourcing to final assembly. The problem wasn't their craftsmanship. Their furniture was superior to anything coming from overseas. The problem was their business model hadn't evolved with the market. They were still operating like it was 1985, with no digital presence, no direct-to-consumer sales, and a distribution network that added 3 layers of markup before products reached customers. The solution required completely reimagining their customer relationship. Instead of selling to furniture stores that marked up their pieces by 300%, we developed a direct sales model showcasing their craftsmen as artists and their furniture as heirloom pieces. We created virtual showrooms, partnered with interior designers, and developed a custom commissioning process that allowed customers to work directly with the craftsmen to create unique pieces. The transformation took 8 months and increased their profit margins by 180%. More importantly, they hired 50 additional workers and became a model for American manufacturing revival. The success story landed me features in Fast Company and Harvard Business Review, establishing my reputation as someone who could save struggling companies without sacrificing their soul. But every victory came with a hidden cost. Each month, as I celebrated new client acquisitions and growing revenue, I was transferring $14,000 to my parents' account. Each time I reinvested profits back into the business, hiring additional consultants, upgrading technology, expanding our office space, I calculated the expense against the backdrop of their mortgage payment. I wasn't complaining. I had chosen this responsibility freely. And watching my business grow, while maintaining my parents' lifestyle, felt like the ultimate vindication of every value they had instilled in me. When other consultants drove luxury cars and bought expensive clothes to impress clients, I drove a practical Toyota and wore the same 3 business suits in rotation. When competitors took lavish vacations to industry conferences in exotic locations, I attended local networking events and invested the savings in better software for my team. The irony was that my financial discipline, developed specifically to support my parents' expenses, was making me a better business owner. I understood cash flow in ways that consultants who had never worried about money couldn't grasp. I could help struggling companies because I understood the daily pressure of making every dollar count. Meanwhile, Celeste was discovering new ways to avoid responsibility with the creativity of a performance artist. After dropping out of UNC Charlotte halfway through her junior year, "I just don't think traditional education is for me," she had announced. She moved back into our parents' guest house and began what she called her entrepreneurial phase. This phase involved a series of business ventures that existed more in her imagination than in reality. First came her organic skincare line, which consisted of her buying products wholesale from a supplier in California and repackaging them with custom labels she designed on Canva. She sold exactly 7 units to family friends before losing interest and leaving boxes of inventory to gather dust in the guest house closet. Next was her lifestyle blog, Living Authentic with Celeste, where she posted photos of herself in expensive clothes she charged to our parents' credit cards, while writing inspirational posts about finding your authentic self and, quote, breaking free from society's expectations. The blog attracted 12 regular readers, most of whom were our relatives who felt obligated to click on her posts. Her most ambitious venture was a wellness coaching business where she offered life advice to people struggling with career transitions. This was particularly rich since Celeste had never held a job for more than 6 months and had no qualifications beyond a weekend certification course she took online. She managed to sign 3 clients before they all requested refunds. When they realized her coaching strategy consisted mainly of suggesting they, quote, trust the universe and follow their bliss. But failure never seemed to discourage her. If anything, each unsuccessful venture reinforced her belief that she was ahead of her time. Too innovative for conventional success, too authentic for a world that rewarded conformity. She would analyze each business failure like a philosopher examining the limitations of capitalism, rather than someone who needed to learn basic business principles. The most frustrating part was watching our parents enable this delusion. Every time I visited for Sunday dinner, they would ask Celeste about her latest project with the same encouraging enthusiasm they had once shown for my legitimate business achievements. They celebrated her creativity, praised her authenticity, and assured her that success would come when she found the right opportunity. When they asked about my business, the questions were different. They wanted to know about profitability, client retention, market expansion. They were proud of my success, but they viewed it as expected rather than extraordinary. I was the responsible daughter doing what responsible daughters do. Celeste was the creative spirit who needed nurturing and protection. I told myself their different expectations reflected their different relationships with us, not their different levels of respect for our capabilities. I convinced myself that supporting their lifestyle while they supported her dreams was just another form of family investment, another way of ensuring everyone had the freedom to pursue their potential. What I didn't realize was that while I was building a business empire and funding their comfortable retirement, Celeste was building something too. She was constructing a narrative where my success was somehow a threat to her authenticity, where my financial independence was evidence of my disconnection from family values, where my ability to solve problems was actually a form of control disguised as generosity. And she was preparing to weaponize that narrative in ways I never could have imagined. The first sign that something was wrong came during what should have been a celebration. It was a Tuesday evening in late September, and I had just signed the biggest contract in Meridian Strategic Solutions history, a 2-year engagement with Blue Ridge Healthcare Systems to restructure their entire network of rural clinics across 4 states. The contract was worth $1.8 million, enough to secure my company's future and finally give me some breathing room in my personal finances. I had driven straight from the signing to my parents' house, still buzzing with excitement and carrying a bottle of Dom Perignon I had splurged on for the occasion. I found them in the sunroom, where Dad was reading medical journals and Mom was working on her needlepoint, a picture of perfect domestic tranquility funded by my monthly transfers. "I have incredible news," I announced, setting the champagne on their coffee table with a flourish. Remember that healthcare contract I've been working on for 6 months? I just signed it. It's going to change everything for the company. I expected enthusiasm, maybe even pride. What I got was a look between my parents that I couldn't quite interpret. Something cautious, almost guilty. Mom set down her needlepoint with unusual care, and Dad closed his medical journal but kept his finger marking the page, as if he expected to return to it quickly. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom said, but her voice carried a strange undertone. "You've worked so hard for this." "We should celebrate," I continued, oblivious to their discomfort. "This contract gives me enough security to start thinking about expansion. Maybe open a second office in Charlotte or even Atlanta. I was actually thinking—" "Actually," Dad interrupted, "there's something we need to discuss with you." The way he said it made my stomach drop. His voice had that careful, measured tone he used when delivering difficult diagnoses to patients. Mom was fidgeting with her wedding ring, spinning it around her finger in a nervous habit I recognized from childhood. "Is everything okay?" I asked, suddenly imagining health crises, family emergencies, the kind of problems that made business contracts seem trivial. "It's about Celeste," Mom said softly. "She's been concerned about some things, about your relationship with the family." I blinked, trying to process this unexpected turn in the conversation. "What do you mean, concerned?" Dad leaned forward in his chair, adopting what I now realize was his intervention posture. "She thinks you've become distant lately, disconnected from family values. She's worried that your success is changing you in ways that might not be healthy." The words hit me like cold water. After everything I had done for them, every sacrifice I had made, every dollar I had transferred to keep them comfortable, my sister had convinced them that I was the problem in our family dynamic. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "Distant how? I'm here every Sunday for dinner. I call Mom twice a week. I helped you plan your anniversary party last month. How exactly am I distant?" Mom and Dad exchanged another look, and I realized this wasn't a spontaneous conversation. They had discussed this, probably at length, probably with Celeste coaching them on what to say. "It's not about frequency," Mom explained. "It's about connection, authenticity. Celeste feels like you don't really see us anymore, like you're going through the motions of family because it's expected, not because you truly want to be here." The accusation was so far from reality that I actually laughed, a short, bitter sound that seemed to surprise all of us. "Are you serious?" I reorganized my entire business schedule to make sure I'm here every Sunday. I turned down a speaking engagement in Denver last month because it conflicted with Dad's birthday dinner. "How is that going through the motions?" "That's exactly what she means," Dad said gently. "Everything with you has become about schedules and obligations. You approach family like another business project that needs to be managed efficiently." I stared at them, trying to understand how my reliability had been reframed as coldness, how my consistency had become evidence of emotional detachment. "So you'd prefer that I be unpredictable? That I cancel family commitments when something more interesting comes up?" "We'd prefer that you be genuine," Mom said. "Like Celeste is. She may not always be punctual or organized, but when she's here, she's really here. She shares her struggles, her dreams, her authentic self. You share your achievements." The criticism felt like a slap. For months, I had been carefully managing my stress about their financial situation, never letting them see how the mortgage payments were affecting my business decisions, never making them feel guilty for needing help. I had thought I was being considerate. Apparently, I was being fake. "What exactly has Celeste told you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Another meaningful look between them. Dad cleared his throat. "She's shown us some concerning things. Text messages where you've complained about family obligations. Comments about how our financial situation reflects poor planning. References to us as burdens." My mouth fell open. "What text messages? I've never written anything like that. I would never—" "She has screenshots," Mom interrupted quietly, "from conversations with your friends, about how exhausting it is to manage our expectations, how you feel trapped by family loyalty." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the arm of my chair, trying to steady myself against this alternate reality where I was apparently the villain in my own story of sacrifice and support. "Those messages don't exist," I said firmly, "because I've never sent them. I've never complained about you to anyone. I've never called you burdens. Celeste is lying." The word hung in the air like an accusation. My parents recoiled slightly, as if I had slapped them. "Why would she lie about something like that?" Dad asked, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Because she's jealous," I said, the truth spilling out before I could consider the consequences. "Because she's 30 years old and has never accomplished anything, and she can't stand that I have. Because she wants to be the favored daughter and she can't earn it, so she's trying to destroy my relationship with you instead." Mom's face went pale. "That's a terrible thing to say about your sister." "It's the truth about my sister. And if you can't see that, if you're willing to believe fabricated text messages over your own experience with me, then maybe she's right. Maybe I should be distant. Maybe I should disconnect." I stood up, leaving the unopened champagne on their coffee table like an abandoned celebration. "I came here to share the best news of my professional life with the people I love most. Instead, I'm being confronted about crimes I didn't commit based on evidence that doesn't exist. I think that tells us everything we need to know about where this family's priorities really lie." I walked toward the door, expecting them to call me back, to realize how absurd this confrontation was, to choose their loyal daughter over their manipulative one. Instead, I heard Mom say softly, "See, this is exactly what Celeste was talking about. The way you shut down and walk away instead of working through problems." I stopped in the doorway, my hand on the handle, and turned back to face them. They looked smaller somehow, older, like people who had made a decision they weren't entirely comfortable with, but were committed to seeing through. "You're right," I said quietly. "I am walking away, because I just realized that I've been fighting for a relationship with people who already chose sides. And I wasn't the side they chose." I drove home through the winding roads of Biltmore Forest, past houses I had helped my parents afford to live among, and understood that everything was about to change. Not just our family dynamics, but the entire structure of their financial security. Because in 3 weeks, when I walked away from their lives as completely as they seemed to want me to, I would be taking my anonymous mortgage payments with me. They just didn't know it yet. The confrontation I had been avoiding happened exactly where I knew it would, at Celeste's territory, the guest house that had become her rent-free kingdom behind our parents' main residence. 3 days after that disastrous conversation with Mom and Dad, I drove back to Biltmore Forest, but this time I bypassed the main house entirely and walked the stone path to the converted carriage house that my sister had claimed as her domain. I found her exactly as I expected, sprawled across the vintage velvet sofa she had convinced our parents to buy her for content creation, surrounded by ring lights and camera equipment for whatever new social media venture she was pretending to pursue. She was wearing what looked like a $300 athleisure set, her laptop balanced on her knees, probably crafting another inspirational post about authentic living while existing entirely off someone else's money. She looked up when I knocked, and for just a moment I saw something flicker across her face, surprise, maybe even fear, before it settled into the practiced expression of wounded innocence she had perfected over the years. "Well, this is unexpected," she said, closing her laptop with deliberate slowness. "I thought you were too busy with your important business deals to visit the family anymore." I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, taking in the space that had become a monument to her entitled existence. The walls were covered with vision boards and motivational quotes written in expensive calligraphy. A professional photography setup occupied one corner, presumably for the lifestyle content that generated zero income but somehow required thousands of dollars in equipment. The kitchen counter was cluttered with supplements and wellness products she promoted on Instagram to her 73 followers, most of whom were relatives and high school acquaintances. "We need to talk," I said, remaining standing while she stayed curled on her sofa like a cat that owned the house. "Do we?" she asked, tilting her head with mock curiosity. "Because last I heard you were done with family drama. Didn't you storm out of Mom and Dad's place the other night? Very mature, by the way." The casual way she referenced our parents' confrontation told me everything I needed to know about who had orchestrated it. She hadn't just fed them lies. She had been coaching them on how to deliver the accusations, probably anticipating my reactions, preparing them for my defenses. "Those text messages you showed them," I said directly, "we both know they don't exist." Celeste blinked slowly, her expression shifting to one of confused hurt. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't," I held up a hand. "Don't insult my intelligence with that performance. I know you fabricated screenshots to make it look like I was complaining about our parents. I know you've been poisoning their perception of me for months, probably longer. What I don't understand is why." For a moment, her mask slipped. I saw something raw and angry flash across her features before she caught herself and rearranged her expression into one of defensive vulnerability. "Maybe," she said carefully, "they're finally seeing what I've been seeing for years. Maybe I didn't have to fabricate anything because your actions speak for themselves." "What actions, exactly?" She sat up straighter, and I could see her gaining confidence, settling into what felt like a prepared argument. "The way you swoop in with solutions to everyone's problems like some kind of savior. The way you make everything about your success, your achievements, your ability to fix things. The way you've turned our parents into a charity case that makes you feel important." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "A charity case? Please." She rolled her eyes. "You think I don't know what you've been doing? The mysterious payments that started showing up right when Dad's practice was struggling? The way you started having all these private conversations with them about their finances? You turned their temporary difficulties into your permanent control mechanism?" My heart stopped. She knew. Somehow she had figured out that I was the anonymous benefactor keeping them afloat. "I don't know what you think you know. I know that you've been paying their mortgage," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I know that you set it up to look like it was coming from some grateful former patient, but really it was you playing the hero again. And I know that you've been holding it over their heads ever since, making them feel indebted to you, making them think they owe you their loyalty." The complete inversion of reality was breathtaking. She had taken my most selfless act and twisted it into evidence of manipulation and control. "I never told them it was me," I said quietly. "I never asked for gratitude or loyalty. I never even hinted that they should treat me differently because of it." "Exactly," she said, as if I had just proved her point. "That's what makes it so manipulative. You created this secret debt they don't even know they owe, and then you acted like their loving, devoted daughter while they struggled with guilt about accepting mystery money. You made them feel like they were failing, while you were secretly succeeding at saving them." I stared at her, trying to understand how someone could take such a deliberately distorted view of altruism. "So in your mind, the problem isn't that they were struggling financially. The problem is that I helped them without taking credit?" "The problem," she said, standing up now and moving closer to me, "is that you've spent our entire lives making the rest of us look inadequate by comparison. The perfect student, the successful businesswoman, the daughter who always has her life together. And when that wasn't enough attention, you started secretly funding their lifestyle so you could be the invisible hero of the family." Her voice was rising, and I could see years of resentment spilling out. This wasn't just about the mortgage payments. This was about every achievement I had earned, every compliment our parents had given me, every moment when her chaos had been contrasted with my stability. "So you decided to destroy my relationship with them," I said, "because you couldn't handle that I was capable of helping when you weren't." "I decided to show them who you really are," she corrected. "Someone so desperate to be needed that you'll manipulate entire family situations to make yourself indispensable. Someone who judges everyone else's failures while hiding your own control issues behind fake generosity." The sophistication of her delusion was almost impressive. She had created an entire narrative where my success was pathological, where my help was harmful, where my love was actually a form of emotional manipulation. "And what about you?" I asked. "What have you contributed to this family besides drama and disappointment? What have you ever done to help our parents besides live off their charity while criticizing everyone who actually supports them?" Her face flushed red. "I give them honesty. I give them authenticity. I don't pretend to be someone I'm not to win their approval. I don't buy their love with secret mortgage payments and fake humility." "You give them nothing," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "You take everything, their money, their space, their emotional energy, and you give them nothing in return except excuses and blame. And now you're trying to take away the one daughter who actually cares about their well-being, because you can't stand that caring requires sacrifice." She stepped back as if I had slapped her. "Get out." "Gladly," I said, moving toward the door. "But understand this, Celeste. When you convince them to cut me out of their lives, you're not just losing a sister who loved you despite everything. You're losing the person who is keeping them from losing everything they've worked for." Her face went pale. "What do you mean?" I paused at the door, looking back at her, surrounded by all the expensive equipment and designer furniture funded by our parents' rapidly depleting savings account. "I mean that anonymous benefactor who's been covering their mortgage for the past 18 months? The one who's been keeping them from foreclosure while you've been focusing on your authentic lifestyle content? That was me. And when they choose your version of the truth over the actual truth, that help disappears." The color drained completely from her face. "You wouldn't." "I wouldn't what? Continue sacrificing my financial security for people who think I'm manipulative and controlling? Continue enabling a family dynamic where the person doing the most gets the least credit while the person doing the least gets the most sympathy? You're right, Celeste. I wouldn't." I opened the door and stepped into the afternoon sunlight. "Enjoy explaining to Mom and Dad how your authentic lifestyle is going to cover $14,000 a month in mortgage payments. I'm sure the universe will provide." As I walked back down the stone path, I heard her calling after me, her voice higher and more desperate than I had ever heard it. But I didn't turn around. I had spent too many years turning around for Celeste, making excuses for her, hoping she would grow into the sister I wanted her to be, instead of accepting who she actually was. 24 days until their next mortgage payment was due. 24 days for them to realize that authentic family values don't pay the bills. And 0 days left of me pretending that this family deserved the sacrifices I had been making. The call came at 7:22 a.m. the next morning, jarring me awake in my downtown penthouse. I had been expecting it. Not this early, but I knew Celeste wouldn't waste time after our confrontation. What I hadn't expected was the formality in my father's voice when I answered. "We need to meet," he said without preamble. "All of us. This morning. There are some serious matters we need to address as a family." His tone carried the weight of medical consultations, the careful distance he maintained when delivering diagnoses that would change everything. I had heard him use this voice exactly twice before. Once when he told my grandmother she had 6 months to live, and once when he explained to a young mother that her husband hadn't survived his heart surgery. "What kind of matters?" I asked, though I already knew. "Legal matters," he said simply. "Be here at 10. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the pre-dawn darkness of my bedroom. Legal matters. In the span of 12 hours, Celeste had managed to escalate our family conflict into something requiring formal intervention. I arrived at the house exactly at 10, parking in the circular driveway beside a sleek black Mercedes I didn't recognize. Through the tall windows of the front sitting room, I could see several figures gathered around the mahogany conference table my parents usually reserved for hosting their medical colleagues and charity board meetings. Mom answered the door with the kind of strained smile she typically wore during difficult social situations. Charity galas where she had to make small talk with people she disliked, medical conferences where Dad's colleagues brought wives she found tedious. But there was something else in her expression now, something that looked almost like guilt mixed with resolve. "Thank you for coming," she said formally, as if I were a business associate rather than her daughter. "Everyone's waiting in the dining room." Everyone turned out to be quite a gathering. Dad sat at the head of the table in his best Navy suit, the one he wore to hospital board meetings and court testimonies. Celeste occupied the chair to his right, wearing what I recognized as her most expensive dress, a cream-colored designer piece she had charged to their credit card 6 months ago for a wedding she ultimately didn't attend. But the real surprise was the stranger sitting across from her. A well-dressed man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of leather briefcase that screamed expensive legal representation. "Please, sit down," Dad said, gesturing to the chair at the opposite end of the table from him. The positioning felt deliberate, isolating, like I was facing a tribunal rather than joining a family discussion. The man with the briefcase stood and extended his hand with professional courtesy. "Ms. Remington, I'm Richard Blackwell from Blackwell Morrison & Associates. I specialize in family law and estate planning." I shook his hand while my mind raced through the implications. Family law, estate planning. They had hired a lawyer to deal with me, their own daughter, over a family disagreement that had started with fabricated text messages. "I'm not sure why we need legal representation for what should be a private family matter," I said, remaining standing, despite their obvious expectation that I would sit. Mr. Blackwell consulted a yellow legal pad covered in neat handwriting. "Your parents have some concerns about recent threats you've made regarding their financial security. Specifically, threats to withdraw support that could result in significant financial hardship or potential foreclosure." The formal language hit me like cold water. Threats. As if my decision to stop funding their lifestyle after being accused of manipulation was somehow illegal rather than rational. "I haven't threatened anyone," I said carefully. "I've simply indicated that I won't continue financial support for people who believe I'm manipulative and controlling." "According to your sister's account," Mr. Blackwell continued, "you explicitly stated that you would disappear as their anonymous benefactor, leaving them unable to meet their mortgage obligations. This could be construed as financial coercion or economic abuse." I looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA, trying to understand how we had arrived at a place where my withdrawal of voluntary financial support was being characterized as abuse. Economic abuse? For stopping payments I was never obligated to make in the first place? Celeste leaned forward, her voice taking on the wounded tone she had perfected during our childhood, whenever she needed to redirect blame. "It's not about the money, it's about the manipulation. You created a secret dependency and then threatened to destroy them when they questioned your motives." The lawyer nodded, as if this reasoning made perfect sense. "There's precedent for cases where family members use financial support as a means of control, then withdraw that support punitively when challenged. The courts have recognized this as a form of elder abuse in some circumstances." Elder abuse. The phrase hung in the air like an accusation. My parents were 62 and 59 years old, both healthy, both professionals, both entirely capable of managing their own financial affairs. The suggestion that I was somehow taking advantage of vulnerable elderly people was so absurd it would have been funny if it weren't being presented as a serious legal concern. "Let me understand this correctly," I said, my voice steady despite the surreal nature of the conversation. "You're suggesting that I'm abusing my parents by choosing not to continue secret financial support after they accused me of being manipulative for providing that support in the first place." Dad cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable but determined. "The issue isn't your right to withdraw support. The issue is the timing and the motivation. Using financial leverage to force family reconciliation or to punish disagreement crosses a line." "What line exactly? The line between generosity and obligation? The line between family support and financial servitude?" Mom spoke for the first time since I had arrived, her voice barely above a whisper. "The line between love and control." The accusation hit me harder than anything the lawyer had said. After 18 months of sacrificing my own financial security to preserve their comfort and dignity, My own mother was suggesting that my love had been a form of control. Mr. Blackwell opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick document. We've prepared a formal cease and desist letter regarding any retaliatory financial actions. Additionally, we're requesting full documentation of all payments made on your parents' behalf, including the method by which these payments were disguised to appear as though they came from other sources. He slid the document across the polished table toward me. The letterhead was expensive, the language formal and threatening. As I scanned the first paragraph, I realized they weren't just asking me to continue the mortgage payments. They were demanding access to my business records, my bank statements, my financial documentation going back 2 years. You want me to provide evidence of every dollar I've spent helping you, I said, looking up from the papers. So you can what, exactly? Prove that I was secretly controlling you by paying your bills? So we can understand the full scope of the financial relationship and ensure that any future arrangements are transparent and properly documented, Dad explained in his careful physician's voice. Future arrangements? I laughed, a short, bitter sound. You think there are going to be future arrangements? You think I'm going to continue funding your lifestyle after you've accused me of elder abuse and threatened me with legal action? Celeste's mask slipped slightly, and I saw a flicker of panic cross her face. For all her careful orchestration of this confrontation, she hadn't fully considered what would happen if I simply walked away from the entire situation. We're not trying to force you to continue supporting us, Mom said quickly. We're just trying to understand. You're trying to have it both ways, I interrupted. You want to paint me as manipulative and controlling, while simultaneously ensuring that the manipulation and control continue to benefit you. You want to characterize my help as abuse while making sure the abuse doesn't stop. Mr. Blackwell's professional demeanor never wavered. We're simply ensuring that any changes to the financial arrangement are handled ethically and legally. If you choose to discontinue support, that's your right, but it must be done without coercion or retaliation. I stood up, leaving the cease and desist letter on the table untouched. Fine. Consider this my formal notice that all financial support will cease immediately. Not as retaliation, not as coercion, but as a natural consequence of this family's decision to hire a lawyer to threaten the daughter who was keeping them afloat. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them processing what immediate cessation meant, not just the end of future payments, but the cancellation of the transfer scheduled to process in 18 days. We could file for a restraining order, Mr. Blackwell said quietly, preventing any abrupt changes that could cause immediate financial hardship. I looked at him with genuine curiosity. A restraining order? Preventing me from not giving them money? I'd love to see you argue that case in court. Your Honor, please force this woman to continue making voluntary payments to people who are threatening her with legal action for making those payments. Dad's face had gone pale. Mom was gripping her hands so tightly her knuckles were white. Even Celeste was beginning to understand that her carefully crafted plan was about to leave her parents financially devastated and herself without anywhere to live. $14,000, I said, looking around the table, due in 18 days. Good luck explaining to Pinnacle Bank why your anonymous benefactor disappeared right after you hired a lawyer to threaten her with elder abuse charges. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Blackwell, when you're preparing your next legal strategy, you might want to research the difference between financial abuse and financial independence. I'm about to demonstrate the latter. As I closed the front door behind me, I could hear voices rising in urgent conversation. But for the first time in 18 months, their financial crisis was no longer my problem to solve. It was theirs. The first thing I did after leaving that legal ambush was something I should have done months ago. I called someone who understood exactly what I was dealing with. Not a lawyer, not a therapist, but my mentor Elena Vasquez, the woman who had built 3 successful companies and survived more family betrayals than most people experience in a lifetime. Elena had been my business advisor since I started Meridian Strategic Solutions, but more than that, she was someone who understood the particular burden of being the successful daughter in a family that mistakes achievement for obligation. Her own story involved supporting her parents through a series of financial crises, only to have them side with her gambling-addicted brother when he accused her of being for refusing to enable his addiction. I reached her at her office in downtown Charlotte, where she was preparing for a board meeting with her latest acquisition. "I need an hour of your time," I said without preamble, "and I need it today." "My office or yours?" she asked immediately, recognizing the urgency in my voice. "Neutral territory. The Grove Park Inn. I'll explain everything when I get there." 2 hours later, we sat in the quiet corner of the hotel's lobby bar, surrounded by tourists and business travelers who had no idea they were witnessing someone's entire family dynamic being dissected and reconstructed. Elena listened without interruption as I laid out the whole story: the secret mortgage payments, Celeste's fabricated evidence, the lawyer's threats, the accusations of elder abuse. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, swirling the ice in her untouched bourbon. "How much documentation do you have?" she asked finally. "Of the payments, everything. Bank transfers, routing numbers, dates, amounts. I kept meticulous records." "Good. What about their actual financial situation? Do you know how dire it really is?" I hesitated. "I know they couldn't make the mortgage payments without help, but I don't know the full scope of their debts or assets." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Here's what's going to happen over the next 2 weeks. They're going to realize that hiring a lawyer was the most expensive mistake of their lives. Not just because of his fees, but because it triggered the very outcome they were trying to prevent. They're going to panic, then they're going to scramble, then they're going to come crawling back with apologies and promises. And what should I do when that happens? That depends on what you want the end result to be. Do you want to maintain a relationship with these people? Do you want to continue supporting them? Do you want to punish them? Or do you want to create a completely new dynamic that actually serves your interests instead of just theirs?" I hadn't considered that last option. For so long, I had been reacting to their needs, their crises, their demands. The idea of creating a situation that actually worked for me felt almost revolutionary. "What would that look like?" I asked. Elena smiled, and I recognized the expression from our business strategy sessions when she was about to suggest something brilliant and slightly ruthless. "Full transparency, complete honesty, and ironclad legal protection for yourself." She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through her contacts. "I'm going to connect you with Sarah Chen at Meridian Legal Group. She specializes in family financial disputes and estate planning. But more importantly, she understands how to protect successful women from family members who see their success as a resource to be exploited." "What kind of protection?" "The kind that ensures if you ever choose to help them again, it's on your terms, with your conditions, and with legal documentation that prevents them from ever using your generosity against you." Elena's voice took on the edge it carried when she was negotiating difficult business deals. "You're going to create a situation where helping them requires them to acknowledge exactly what you've done, apologize for exactly how they've treated you, and agree to exactly how future interactions will be structured." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Instead of being the victim of their manipulation, I could be the architect of whatever relationship emerged from this crisis. "But first," Elena continued, "you need to let them experience the full consequences of their choices. No rescue operations, no last-minute interventions, no matter how desperate they get. They need to understand that actions have consequences, and that treating their benefactor like an abuser has very specific results." She was right, of course. For 18 months, I had been enabling not just their lifestyle, but their delusion that they could take my support for granted while treating me poorly. My immediate response to save them from every crisis had taught them that there would never be real consequences for their behavior. "How long do I let them struggle?" I asked. "Until they're ready to have an honest conversation about the real situation. Until they're willing to acknowledge what you've done and apologize for how they've responded. Until they're desperate enough to accept help with conditions instead of demanding help without consequences." Elena gave me Sarah Chen's contact information and helped me outline a strategy for the coming weeks. First, complete financial separation. No emergency interventions, no matter what sob story they presented. Second, documentation of everything. Every attempt they made to contact me, every lie they told about the situation, every consequence they faced. Third, preparation for the eventual reconciliation conversation, including legal frameworks for any future financial assistance. One more thing, Elena said as we prepared to leave. This situation isn't just about your parents and sister. It's about every future relationship you'll have, every business partnership, every family interaction. How you handle this sets the precedent for how people are allowed to treat you when you're in a position of power or success. That evening, I called Sarah Chen from my downtown office, looking out at the lights of Asheville, while I explained the situation to someone who had seen similar family dynamics play out dozens of times. Family financial abuse is more common than people realize, Sarah said after I finished my summary. Especially when one family member becomes significantly more successful than the others. The psychology is predictable. They simultaneously resent your success and feel entitled to benefit from it. What's my best strategy for protecting myself going forward? Complete documentation of the current situation, legal frameworks for any future assistance, and what I call strategic patience. Let them face the natural consequences of their choices while you prepare for the eventual negotiation. Sarah explained that she could draft several documents that would be useful if and when my family came back seeking help. A formal loan agreement with specific terms and conditions. A family financial assistance contract that outlined expectations and consequences. Even a mediation framework that would ensure any future conflicts were handled professionally, rather than emotionally. The key, she explained, is shifting the power dynamic. Right now, they see your help as something they're entitled to receive and criticize. These documents would make it clear that your help is a privilege they need to earn and maintain. Over the next few days, I threw myself into this new project with the same intensity I brought to my business consulting. I organized every bank statement, every transfer record, every piece of documentation related to their mortgage payments. I created a timeline of our family interactions, noting every instance where they had criticized my choices while benefiting from my financial support. Most importantly, I began crafting what Sarah called my terms of engagement, the specific conditions that would need to be met before I would consider any future assistance. Full acknowledgement of what I had done, genuine apologies for how they had treated me, written agreements about future interactions, and complete transparency about their actual financial situation. But the most crucial element of my strategy was psychological. I had to genuinely be prepared to walk away permanently if they couldn't meet these conditions. Elena had been clear about this. You can't negotiate from a position of strength if you're not willing to accept the outcome where the other party refuses your terms. The question you need to answer honestly, Elena had said, is whether you'd rather have a relationship with people who treat you poorly or no relationship with people who won't treat you well. For the first time in 18 months, I felt like I was in control of my own story instead of just reacting to theirs. Whatever happened next would be on my terms, with my conditions, for my benefit as much as theirs. All I had to do now was wait for them to realize they needed me more than I needed them. 14 days and counting. The phone calls started on day 10. Not from my parents. They were still too proud for direct contact, but from people in their social circle who had begun to notice something was wrong. The first call came from Dorothy Whitman, Mom's closest friend from the hospital auxiliary, and someone who had never contacted me directly in my entire adult life. "Darling," she said in her practiced Southern drawl, "I'm calling because I'm concerned about your mother. She missed our planning meeting for the Christmas charity gala, and when I stopped by to check on her, she seemed distressed." I knew exactly what Dorothy was fishing for, and I also knew that anything I said would be reported back to my parents within hours. "I'm sure she's just busy with end-of-year activities," I replied neutrally. "Well, yes, but she mentioned some family tensions, and I thought perhaps you might know." Dorothy let the sentence hang, waiting for me to fill in the details she could then share with the rest of their social circle. "Family relationships can be complicated," I said. "I'm sure everything will work out as it should." After I hung up, I made notes in the file I had started keeping. Dorothy's call, the fishing for information, the subtle pressure tactics. Sarah Chan had been right about documenting everything. These peripheral contacts were part of a pattern I needed to track. The calls continued over the next few days. Dr. Peterson from Dad's medical practice, ostensibly calling about a consulting opportunity, but really trying to gauge whether there was truth to the rumors that the Remington family was experiencing financial difficulties. Margaret Sinclair from the country club, wondering if I was planning to attend the New Year's Eve gala with my parents as usual. Robert Harrison from their investment firm, asking if I was still interested in the portfolio review I had inquired about months earlier. Each conversation felt like reconnaissance, people in their orbit trying to understand what was happening without directly asking. But more importantly, each call confirmed that my parents' carefully maintained facade was beginning to crack. Their social circle was noticing their absence from events, their distraction during conversations, their sudden reluctance to participate in activities that required financial commitments. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen was conducting her own investigation into my family's actual financial situation. With my permission, she had hired a discreet financial research firm to analyze public records, property assessments, and business filings related to Remington Cardiovascular Associates. "Your instincts were right," she told me during our weekly check-in. "Their financial situation is significantly worse than you realized." She spread a series of documents across her conference table, each one revealing another layer of their economic fragility. Their medical practice has been hemorrhaging money since 2020. Patient volume dropped 40% during the pandemic and never fully recovered. They took out several business loans to maintain operations, secured against both the practice and their personal assets. The numbers were staggering. Beyond the $2.7 million mortgage on the house, they owed $400,000 in business loans, $180,000 in credit card debt, and had borrowed against Dad's retirement accounts to the tune of another $350,000. Their total debt exceeded $3.6 million, while their liquid assets amounted to less than $50,000. "Without your monthly payments," Sarah continued, "they're facing a cascading financial collapse. The mortgage payment you've been covering was just the tip of the iceberg. They've been using credit cards and home equity lines to cover other expenses, assuming your anonymous benefactor would continue indefinitely." The research revealed something else that made my stomach turn. Celeste's lifestyle hadn't been funded entirely by their credit cards and savings. She had been receiving a monthly allowance of $3,500, ostensibly for helping with Mom's charity work and Dad's practice management. In reality, she had been paid more than most people's salaries for the privilege of living rent-free while undermining the person actually keeping the family afloat. "There's more," Sarah said, producing another set of documents. "Your sister has been positioning herself as their financial power of attorney. She filed the paperwork 3 months ago, right around the time she started her campaign to discredit you." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Celeste hadn't just been jealous of my success. She had been systematically positioning herself to control my parents' finances. The lies about my manipulative behavior weren't just emotional manipulation. They were groundwork for a legal takeover of their assets. She was planning to gain control of their finances, and then continue accessing your support through them, Sarah explained. Classic financial elder abuse, but sophisticated enough that it might have worked if you hadn't withdrawn your help. That evening, I sat in my office reviewing everything Sarah's team had uncovered, trying to process the magnitude of what my sister had attempted. This wasn't sibling rivalry, or even ordinary greed. This was a calculated scheme to destroy my relationship with our parents, while positioning herself as their financial guardian, effectively giving her access to both their remaining assets and whatever future support I might provide. The most disturbing part was how close she had come to succeeding. If I had continued the mortgage payments while enduring their accusations, if I had tried to maintain family harmony at any cost, Celeste would have gradually gained more control over their financial decisions. Eventually, she would have been in a position to demand money from me directly, using their needs as leverage while keeping them dependent and grateful for her management of their affairs. But her plan had one fatal flaw. It required me to continue being the passive, accommodating daughter who prioritized family peace over personal respect. She had built her entire strategy around the assumption that I would never actually walk away, never actually let them face the consequences of choosing her lies over my loyalty. Sarah helped me understand that this revelation changed our strategy significantly. This isn't just about setting boundaries for future financial assistance, she explained. This is about protecting your parents from someone who's been systematically positioning herself to exploit them. We began preparing a comprehensive presentation that would lay out everything we had discovered, not just my own financial contributions, but the full scope of their debt situation, Celeste's systematic deception, and the legal maneuvering she had been conducting behind everyone's backs. When they come to you for help, and they will, you need to present this information as a package, Sarah advised. Not as accusations or revenge, but as the factual foundation for any future assistance. They need to understand not just what you've done for them, but what's been done to them. The presentation took 3 days to compile. Bank records showing 18 months of mortgage payments, credit reports revealing the true extent of their debt, legal documents showing Celeste's attempts to gain financial control, even screenshots of her social media posts showing expensive purchases made during the same periods when she was telling our parents I was being financially irresponsible. But the most powerful element was a simple financial projection Sarah's team had prepared. A month-by-month breakdown of what would happen to their finances without my support. The mortgage going into default after 30 days. Credit cards maxing out after 60 days. Business loan payments becoming impossible after 90 days. Foreclosure proceedings beginning after 120 days. They have exactly 6 days before missing their first mortgage payment, Sarah noted during our final preparation meeting. Based on the pattern we've seen with similar families, the panic calls will start in 3 to 4 days. She was right, but even she underestimated how desperate they would become. Because the call that finally came wasn't from my parents or their friends trying to gather information. It was from Celeste herself, and she wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling to threaten me with something I had never seen coming. Celeste's call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday night, 13 days after I had walked out of their legal ambush. I almost didn't answer. Her name on my caller ID was the last thing I wanted to see before bed. But something about the timing felt urgent, desperate even, so I picked up on the 4th ring. "You have to stop this," she said without preamble, her voice higher and more strained than I had ever heard it. "You're destroying our family." "I'm not destroying anything," I replied calmly, though my heart was racing. "I'm simply not participating in my own abuse anymore. Mom had a panic attack yesterday. Dad hasn't slept in a week. They're talking about selling the house, moving into some apartment, ruining everything they've worked for their entire lives. Is this really what you want?" I could hear the manipulation in her voice, the calculated attempt to make me feel guilty for their consequences. But I could also hear something else, genuine fear. The kind of terror that comes when a carefully constructed plan begins to collapse, and you realize you're about to lose everything. "What I want," I said slowly, "is for them to understand that there are consequences for believing lies about the person who was keeping them afloat." "I never lied about anything," she snapped, and there it was, the first crack in her facade. "I told them what I observed, what I suspected. If you want to call that lying, fine, but everything I said was based on your actual behavior. Which text messages were based on my actual behavior, Celeste? The ones where I allegedly called them burdens? The screenshots you fabricated to convince them I was documenting their conversations? Which part of your observation included completely fictional evidence? The silence stretched for almost 30 seconds before she spoke again, her voice softer but somehow more dangerous. You want to talk about evidence? Let's talk about evidence, because I have some things you might find interesting. My blood turned cold. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the irregularities in your business accounts, the way you've been moving money around to hide the source of those mortgage payments. The tax implications of providing unreported gifts to family members, the potential fraud charges you could face if someone decided to investigate your financial practices. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, trying to process what she was threatening. There are no irregularities. There's no fraud. I reported the gifts appropriately on my tax returns. Are you sure about that? Her voice carried a smugness that made my skin crawl. Because I've been doing some research. Gift tax liability for amounts over $15,000 per year. Reporting requirements for financial assistance to family members. Documentation standards for legitimate business expenses versus personal transfers. She had clearly spent considerable time researching ways to attack me legally, looking for any technicality or requirement I might have missed. The sophistication of her threats revealed just how far she was willing to go to maintain control of the situation. And here's the interesting part, she continued. I've already spoken to someone at the IRS about potential unreported gift tax violations. Apparently, they're very interested in cases where successful business owners provide substantial financial assistance to family members without proper documentation. The threat was crystal clear. If I didn't resume the mortgage payments, she would try to destroy me financially through tax investigations and fraud allegations. It was a nuclear option, the kind of attack that could damage my business reputation even if the charges were ultimately unfounded. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had revealed the existence of evidence I hadn't known about, evidence that would prove just how calculated and malicious her campaign against me had been. Let me ask you something, Celeste, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. When did you start researching gift tax violations? When did you contact the IRS? Was it before or after you convinced our parents I was manipulating them? I could hear her sharp intake of breath, the realization that she had just admitted to planning my financial destruction in advance. That doesn't matter, she said quickly. What matters is that you're going to resume those payments, or I'm going to make sure you face every possible legal consequence for your financial manipulation of our family. Actually, I said, reaching for the files Sarah Chen had prepared, I think the timing matters quite a bit. Just like the timing of your power of attorney filing matters. Just like the timing of your accusations matters. Just like the timing of your sudden concern for our parents' authenticity matters. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think you've been planning this for months, maybe longer. Building a case against me while positioning yourself to control their finances. The lies about my text messages were just the beginning, weren't they? The silence on the other end confirmed what I suspected. This wasn't a spontaneous reaction to family tensions. It was a coordinated campaign designed to eliminate me as a rival for our parents' trust and resources. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my confidence growing with each word. You're going to hang up this phone and think very carefully about whether you want to continue down this path. Because while you've been researching my potential tax violations, some very expensive lawyers have been researching your actual financial fraud. What fraud? The panic in her voice was unmistakable now. The power of attorney documents you filed without our parents' knowledge. The monthly allowance you've been receiving for work you never performed. The attempt to gain legal control over their finances while they're facing a crisis you helped create. Would you like me to continue? I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow as she processed the implications of what I was saying. You see, Celeste, while you were focused on destroying me, you forgot to cover your own tracks. You left a paper trail of financial manipulation and elder abuse that makes my gift tax situation look like a parking ticket. You can't prove any of that. Can't I? Bank records showing your monthly payments for non-existent work. Legal documents filed without proper disclosure. Social media posts showing expensive purchases made while you were claiming financial hardship. Text messages where you coordinated your lies about me. Oh, and my personal favorite, the recording of our conversation where you admitted to knowing about the mortgage payments and using that knowledge to manipulate our parents. She was quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. You were recording me? North Carolina is a one-party consent state, I said calmly. I didn't need your permission to record our conversation in your guest house, the one where you admitted to fabricating evidence and deliberately destroying my relationship with our parents. The recording had been Sarah's idea, a precaution in case Celeste later tried to deny the things she had said. I hadn't planned to use it, but her threats changed everything. That recording is very detailed, I continued. Your admission that you knew about my financial support. Your explanation of how you twisted it into evidence of manipulation. Your description of the fake text messages. Your acknowledgement that you were jealous of my success and wanted to be the favored daughter. You bitch, she whispered. And there's more. Documentation of every lie you told, every false accusation you made, every attempt to turn our parents against me. Financial records showing how you've been exploiting them while I was supporting them. Legal analysis of your attempted power grab and what it constitutes under North Carolina elder abuse statutes. I paused to let this sink in. So here's your choice, Celeste. You can continue threatening me with IRS investigations and gift tax violations, in which case I will provide all of this evidence to law enforcement and let them determine who's actually been committing financial crimes in this family. Or, she asked, though she clearly didn't want to hear the answer, or you can start telling our parents the truth, all of it. The lies you told, the evidence you fabricated, the financial schemes you've been running. You can confess to everything you've done and help them understand why their mortgage payments stopped. And if I do that, then maybe we can find a way forward that doesn't involve criminal charges. Maybe we can focus on actually helping them instead of fighting over who gets to control them. The line was quiet except for the sound of her crying. Not the manipulative tears she used to get her way, but the desperate sobs of someone who had finally realized that their carefully constructed house of lies was collapsing around them. I can't, she whispered. If I tell them everything, they'll never forgive me. And if you don't tell them, I replied, you'll never have the chance to earn their forgiveness. Because the truth is coming out either way, Celeste. The only question is whether it comes from you or from the lawyers who are documenting your financial abuse of them. I hung up before she could respond, leaving her to contemplate a choice between confession and prosecution. Either way, our parents were about to learn exactly who had been protecting them and who had been exploiting them. The truth, as it turns out, has a way of surfacing just when people need it most. The breakthrough came at 6:23 a.m. on Tuesday morning, exactly 15 days after I had walked out of their legal ambush. I was reviewing quarterly reports for my Charleston healthcare contract when my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't expected. Drive. Harrison Remington's private line at the hospital. I need to see you. Dad's voice was hollow, stripped of the authoritative tone he had used during our last encounter. Not at the house. Somewhere neutral. There are things I need to understand. We met at the Botanical Gardens at Biltmore Estate, a place that held no family memories, no emotional baggage from childhood visits or holiday gatherings. I found him sitting on a bench overlooking the conservatory, looking older than I had ever seen him. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, the exhausted posture of someone who had been carrying an impossible weight. "Celeste came to see us yesterday," he said without preamble as I sat down beside him. "She told us everything." I waited, not trusting myself to speak. After 2 weeks of strategic silence, this moment felt too crucial for anything but careful listening. "The text messages she showed us," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "they were fake. She created them using some app, made it look like you were saying terrible things about us to your friends. She admitted to fabricating all of it." My chest tightened, not with vindication but with a deep sadness for what this revelation must have cost him. "What else did she tell you?" "About the mortgage payments, about you being our anonymous benefactor for the past 18 months. About the power of attorney documents she filed without telling us." He turned to look at me directly for the first time since I had arrived. "About the recording you have of her confessing to everything." So she had chosen confession over prosecution. I wondered what had finally broken through her denial. Fear of criminal charges, or the realization that her lies were about to be exposed anyway. "She also told us about the monthly allowance we've been paying her," Dad continued. "Money she claimed was for helping with your mother's charity work and my practice management, work she never actually did." I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I had been carrying for months without fully realizing it. How is Mom handling all of this? "She's devastated, not just about Celeste's lies, but about how we treated you. About believing someone who was manipulating us over someone who was saving us." He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of exhaustion that made him look every one of his 62 years. "She's been crying for 2 days straight." The image of my mother crying over this situation, after everything I had endured to prevent exactly this kind of pain, hit me harder than I expected. "Where is Celeste now?" "Packing. We asked her to leave the guest house. She'll be staying with her friend Michelle until she can figure out her next steps." Dad's voice carried a finality I had never heard when discussing his younger daughter. "We also terminated her monthly allowance and revoked any access she had to our financial accounts." I nodded, processing this information. "And the power of attorney documents?" "Our lawyer is handling that. Apparently she filed them incorrectly anyway. Missing signatures, improper witnessing. He said they never would have held up if anyone had challenged them." We sat in silence for several minutes, watching tourists move through the gardens with their cameras and guidebooks, living normal lives untouched by family betrayal and financial manipulation. "I don't know how to apologize for what we put you through," Dad said finally, "for believing her lies, for hiring that lawyer to threaten you, for treating our most loyal daughter like she was the enemy." "You believed what you were shown," I said carefully. "She was very convincing. We should have asked you directly. We should have given you a chance to defend yourself instead of ambushing you with accusations based on fabricated evidence." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "We should have remembered that you've never given us a reason not to trust you." That acknowledgement, that recognition of my 18 months of sacrifice and loyalty, broke something open inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of a path toward it. "What happens now?" I asked. "We're hoping you'll consider helping us figure that out." "Not financially. We understand that trust has to be rebuilt before anything like that could happen. But practically, we need to understand the full scope of our financial situation and explore our options." This was the opening Sarah Chen had prepared me for, the moment when they would be ready to have an honest conversation about their actual needs and my actual conditions. "I can help with that," I said, "but things will be different this time." "Different how?" I pulled out a folder I had brought with me, a simplified version of the comprehensive documentation Sarah had prepared. "Complete transparency about your financial situation. No more secrets, no more pride-driven decisions that ignore reality. If I'm going to help you understand your options, I need access to all the information." Dad nodded immediately. "Of course. And if there's ever any future financial assistance, and I'm not saying there will be, It would be documented, structured, and with clear terms that protect everyone involved. That sounds reasonable. Most importantly, I continued, looking directly at him, this kind of manipulation can never happen again. Not from Celeste, not from anyone. If someone brings you accusations about me in the future, you come to me first. You ask questions instead of making assumptions. Agreed. He paused, then added, for what it's worth, I don't think we'll be hearing accusations from Celeste about anyone for a long time. She knows how close she came to criminal charges. What did you tell her about the recording? That we've heard it. That we know exactly what she said and what she admitted to. That if she ever tries to manipulate this family again, we'll pursue every legal option available to us. I was surprised by the firmness in his voice. For all their flaws, my parents weren't stupid people. Once they understood how comprehensively they had been deceived, their response was appropriately severe. There's something else, Dad said, reaching into his jacket pocket. We want you to have this. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Mom's careful handwriting. Inside was a check for $63,000, exactly 18 months of the $3,500 monthly allowance they had been paying Celeste. We know money doesn't fix what happened, he explained, but that allowance was supposed to be compensation for family support work. You're the one who was actually providing that support. I stared at the check, overwhelmed not by the amount but by what it represented. Acknowledgement, restitution, a concrete recognition that they understood who had been helping and who had been taking advantage. There's a letter, too, Dad said softly. I unfolded the second piece of paper and immediately recognized Mom's handwriting, shakier than usual but unmistakably hers. My dearest daughter, I don't know if sorry is a big enough word for what we've done to you. We failed you as parents, as the people who were supposed to protect and believe in you above all others. You kept us from losing everything while we accused you of trying to control us. You sacrificed your own financial security while we questioned your motives. You loved us unconditionally while we made that love conditional on accepting lies about your character. We know we don't deserve your forgiveness, but we're hoping you might consider giving us the chance to earn it back. Not through money or gifts, but through the kind of trust and respect we should have shown you all along. You are the daughter we're most proud of, and we're sorry it took losing you to remember that. All our love, Mom and Dad. I folded the letter carefully, not trusting myself to speak for several minutes. When I finally looked up, Dad was watching me with an expression I recognized from childhood. The way he used to look at me when I had scraped my knee or had my feelings hurt. Like he wanted to fix everything but wasn't sure how. Your mother wants to see you, he said. When you're ready, she knows it might take time. I'll call her, I said, soon. As we stood to leave, Dad hesitated. The mortgage payment is due in 3 days. We've accepted that we're going to miss it. We're prepared for whatever consequences that brings. I nodded, not ready to make any promises, but understanding that this acknowledgement, this acceptance of responsibility for their choices, was exactly what I had been waiting for. For the first time in 15 days, they weren't asking me to save them. They were asking for the chance to save themselves, with my guidance rather than my money. It was a beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my parents' new home, a modest but beautiful craftsman-style house in the Montford neighborhood, about 15 minutes from their old Biltmore Forest estate. The difference was striking. Where their previous home had been a monument to status and appearance, this house felt like an actual home. Warm, lived in, proportioned for people rather than for impressing visitors. Mom was at the stove, making her famous tomato basil soup, humming softly to herself, something I hadn't heard her do in years. Dad sat at the kitchen table reviewing patient files, but he looked up and smiled when I walked in, a genuine expression of contentment rather than the stressed politeness that had characterized our interactions for so long. Perfect timing, Mom said, turning to hug me. I just pulled the cornbread out of the oven. These Sunday dinners had become our new tradition, but they were nothing like the formal affairs we used to have in the Biltmore Forest dining room. No crystal, no china, no performative elegance. Just family sitting around a kitchen table, talking about real things, instead of maintaining careful facades. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. After that conversation with Dad at the Botanical Gardens, it had taken 3 months of family counseling, financial restructuring, and honest conversations to build something that resembled trust again. But what emerged was stronger than what we'd had before. A relationship based on truth rather than obligation, mutual respect rather than financial dependence. The house sale had been their decision, made after Sarah Chen's team conducted a comprehensive analysis of their financial situation. Even with the mortgage payments I had been making, their debt load was unsustainable. The only way forward was a complete reset, selling the estate, downsizing dramatically, and restructuring their entire approach to money and status. It was the best decision we ever made, Mom had told me during one of our rebuilding conversations. That house was beautiful, but it was also a prison. Every month we lived there, we were terrified of not being able to maintain it. This house is ours, really ours. Dad's medical practice had undergone its own transformation. Instead of trying to compete with larger cardiology groups, he had repositioned himself as a concierge physician for a smaller patient base, focusing on personalized care rather than volume. The change reduced his income significantly, but it also reduced his overhead and stress. More importantly, it aligned with why he had become a doctor in the first place, to help people, not to fund an unsustainable lifestyle. I'd forgotten how much I loved medicine, he told me one afternoon as we walked through their new neighborhood. When you're constantly worried about making enough money to pay for things you don't really need, you lose sight of what actually matters. The financial assistance I eventually provided was nothing like the secret mortgage payments of the past. Working with Sarah Chen, we had created a formal family assistance agreement, a structured loan with clear terms, reasonable interest, and defined repayment schedules. But more importantly, the loan was for their new beginning, not for maintaining their old illusions. I had helped them with the down payment on their Montfort house and provided bridge financing while they transitioned Dad's practice to the new model. The total amount was actually less than what I had been secretly paying on their old mortgage, but this time it felt completely different. They understood exactly what I was providing, exactly what it cost me, and exactly how they planned to repay it. The transparency changes everything, Sarah had explained to us during one of our family financial planning sessions. When help is secret, it creates shame and resentment. When it's open and structured, it creates partnership and accountability. Celeste had been absent from this rebuilding process, though not entirely out of our lives. She had moved to Charlotte, where she was working as a marketing assistant for a real estate firm, her first steady job in years. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and for the first time since college, she was supporting herself without family assistance. She calls every few weeks, Mom had told me during one of our conversations. The conversations are different now. She doesn't ask for money or complain about her problems. She talks about her work, her small apartment, the cooking classes she's taking. It's like she's finally growing up. I wasn't ready for a relationship with Celeste yet, and might never be. The damage she had caused went too deep for simple forgiveness. But I could appreciate that she was at least trying to build a life based on her own efforts rather than other people's resources. The most significant change was in my own relationship with success and family. For years, I had equated love with financial support, believing that my value to my family was tied to my ability to solve their problems. The crisis had forced me to understand that real love requires boundaries, that genuine help sometimes means allowing people to face consequences, and that the most valuable thing you can give someone isn't money, it's the expectation that they're capable of handling their own lives. "You saved us," Dad had said during one of our early rebuilding conversations, not with the mortgage payments, though we're grateful for those. "You saved us by refusing to enable our delusions. by forcing us to face reality instead of living in a fantasy funded by your sacrifice. My business had thrived during this period, partly because I was no longer diverting significant resources to support their lifestyle, but mostly because the experience had given me insights into family business dynamics that made me a more effective consultant. I had started specializing in family-owned companies dealing with generational transitions and financial conflicts. My own experience with family financial manipulation had become my greatest professional asset. There's something powerful about working with someone who's lived through the dynamics they're helping you navigate, Jake Morrison from Appalachian Brewing had told me. You don't just understand the business principles, you understand the emotional complexity. The most important lesson I learned was about the difference between being needed and being valued. For years, I had been needed for money, for problem solving, for maintaining family stability, but being needed had made me resentful and them dependent. Being valued for my judgment, my integrity, my genuine care for their well-being created a relationship that served everyone. The irony, Elena Vasquez had observed during one of our mentoring sessions, is that when you stopped trying to be indispensable, you became actually valuable. When you stopped letting them take advantage of your love, they started appreciating your love. As I sat in their kitchen that Sunday evening, watching my parents move around each other with the easy familiarity of people who were finally living within their means and their values, I understood that we had all been transformed by this crisis. They had learned that authentic relationships require honest communication and mutual respect. I had learned that love without boundaries isn't love, it's enablement. But the most profound lesson was about the nature of family itself. Family isn't about biology or obligation or maintaining appearances. Family is about people who choose to support each other's growth, who tell each other the truth even when it's difficult, who create space for everyone to be their authentic selves, rather than performing roles that serve other people's needs. You know what I'm most grateful for? Mom asked as we sat around their table sharing dessert and stories from our week. That we finally have a family dinner where no one is pretending to be someone they're not. I looked around the table, at Dad in his comfortable sweater instead of his formal suit, at Mom with flowers still dusting her apron, at the mismatched chairs and simple table setting that somehow felt more elegant than all the crystal and china we used to use. This is what it was supposed to feel like all along, I realized out loud. Dad reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you for refusing to let us settle for less than this. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Asheville that evening, I thought about all the people who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Successful children supporting parents who don't appreciate the sacrifice, family members who mistake kindness for weakness, people who confuse love with obligation. The truth I learned is this: you cannot save people who don't want to be saved, but you can refuse to enable people who don't want to be honest. You cannot control how others treat you, but you can control how much access they have to your resources and your peace. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them experience the natural consequences of their choices, even when watching them struggle breaks your heart. Real family, the kind worth fighting for, doesn't ask you to sacrifice your dignity for their comfort. Real family doesn't mistake your strength for their entitlement. Real family doesn't require you to stay small so others can feel big. Real family grows together, struggles together, and transforms together. And when you find that kind of family, whether through blood, choice, or the ashes of what used to be, you protect it fiercely, nurture it carefully, and never take it for granted. Because authentic love, it turns out, is worth every sacrifice required to find it, and every boundary required to keep it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.